on Quest, actress Rose Lenore joins me in an exclusive interview that you won't want to miss. Life is a quest for logic and reason. It is a quest to find balance between science and faith. Life is a quest for knowledge and understanding. But most importantly, it's a quest for personal discovery. Whatever your quest, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Welcome to Quest. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Todd Fischer, and this is Season 2 of Quest. For those of you that might be new listeners, let me tell you a little about me. I'm the founder of Metacortex and the author of the best-selling book, Metacortex: The Grand Design. I'm a philosopher, a theorist, and a metaphysicist. I'm a perpetual pupil of theology and an expert in comparative religious study. I've also extensively researched the mind-body connection, anatomy, and physiology. I'm a researcher and a storyteller. And in order to tell this story, the research is necessary, and part of the research is the search. And that brings us to why I created the Quest podcast. A quest is a search for something, and this podcast will show you how we know what we know through interviews with people that have incredible stories of dedication and perseverance. To me, curiosity is part of what makes us human, and there's still so much we don't know. There's joy in discovery. It's what drives us. It's our quest. Hi everyone. Today my guest is Rose Lenore. Rose was just 11 months old when her mother, Bonnie Lee Bakley, was fatally shot outside a restaurant in Studio City, California on May 4th of 2001. She was just a year older when her Emmy-winning actor father, Robert Blake, was charged with Bakley's murder. He was acquitted at his criminal trial, but later found civilly liable. Now, 19 years later, their daughter, Rose Lenore, joins me in her first podcast interview to talk about how she copes with that trauma and how her life is today. This was a great interview. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Rose. Welcome to the Quest podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the show. You're a guest I've wanted to get for a long time. I think you have this incredible story, and I follow you on social media and see the kind of stuff you put out there. And I want to kind of get into this now. We're recording this at the end of January. It's going to come out in a couple of weeks. And this is kind of an anniversary year for this tragic event. And for those listeners that don't know, we're going to talk about this. You had kind of a tragic Hollywood story. And when you were 11 months old, your mother, Bonnie Bakley, was fatally shot in Los Angeles. And your father, who was a popular television actor, film actor, was charged in her murder. And he was acquitted in the criminal trial, but later found guilty in the civil trial. And now, 19 years later, you're on my podcast, and we're going to kind of pick up from that point. This is a terrible, tragic, there's a lot of Hollywood stories like this that are just awful. You're part of one of those, and that's just an amazing thing. So I want to know, so here we are 20 years after that. What are your earliest memories of all this stuff? You must not remember much from that time, right? If anything?
No, I don't remember anything until I was about 5 years old in my childhood.
Yeah, I figured that probably there's no way you could have had any recollection of this. So you don't remember, all you know, I've heard you say this before in your interviews, that the stuff you know is the same stuff all of us know from Google and just the results of the trials and all that stuff, which I think is really interesting for you to say that. So what's interesting to me is, you don't remember the trials or any of that stuff that happened back then. So I'm assuming probably your family must have sheltered you a lot at that time too when you were young. Is that accurate to say?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think they did their best to, like, keep me away from all that, drama.
Yeah. And you're raised by your half sister? Is that accurate?
Yeah, so
Okay.
she adopted me when I was a baby, so she's my mom, and then, she was married, so, yeah, I had a mom and dad growing up.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Do you remember the last time that you saw your father before you went to live with your sister?
Yeah, actually, he was a part of my life until, I don't know, I think I was about, like, 6, 5 or 6, and then I stopped seeing him.
Yeah. Did you when you were adopted, what was your life like then? Especially just really a few years out of when these events happened. Did you have a normal childhood? Did you go to a regular school? Did you grow up kind of spiritual or religious? Tell me about young Rose.
I mean, I kinda think there's no way to have a perfectly normal childhood in that scenario. I did go to normal school. I had all my friends. I mean, no one really knew that this was where I came from. It wasn't something that my family was very vocal about, and I didn't like introduce myself to people like, "Hey, I'm Rose. This is where, this is what happened to me." So no one
Yeah.
really knew about it until I was like 18 and I started really talking about it. So yeah,
Wow.
I would say for the most part, my childhood was more normal than people would think it would be.
Wow. So even your close friends didn't really know?
I think I started talking about it with my like very, very close friends when I was a little older, like maybe eighth grade or like high school age. But it wasn't something that like as a kid was known.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. Did you ever have like paparazzi experiences? Were you ever tracked down by anyone in the media?
Yeah, it was super weird because I didn't understand that my family was like famous. So when it happened, I was always very confused. I remember like one of the first times I remember was going somewhere. I think it was like with my mom for work or something like that. And I was like 12 years old and they like took a picture of us and put it in a magazine. And I was just
Wow.
like, wow, that's so weird. Like I could not comprehend it.
Wow. Has that happened a lot in your child? I remember reading that maybe when you were in high school, you were a cheerleader and
Yeah. Yeah.
the media showed up there. Did that freak you out too?
Yeah, that was probably the worst one that I had, like, on my own because my parents weren't there. It was, like, an away game for school, and I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I just remember, like, making eye contact with some guy who was, like, taking pictures of me with, like, a very professional camera, and I was like, like, I think this might be something, going on. And then I think it was like 2 weeks later, a magazine article came out, and I was like, "Oh, that's what it was." It was just uncomfortable. So,
Sure.
yeah.
When you mentioned that in your childhood, the last time you saw your father was you were 5 or 6. Was
Mhm.
that your decision to continue to not see your father, or was that your family that were, or was there just a common breach that happened?
I mean, I'm not exactly sure. I think it was more of a, I don't know. I think all the adults decided what was best in the
Yeah.
moment.
I assume that was probably what how it happened. We're going to touch on, you actually reconnected with your father recently, and we're going to talk about that a little later in
Yeah.
the podcast. But I'm curious, you've been kind of publicly, I follow you on TikTok and different things, and you're always out there just talking about stuff, and I
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. And I sometimes I'm like, wow, like you must have a really thick skin to see for the comments that come across. Sometimes they're just awful and terrible and rude. And then
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
lot of people that like really want to know things, or, you know, and I'm like, I thought, wow, this is like such a dangerous medium to be in, just
Yeah.
because of just the sheer amount of just, asses that are out there that say whatever they want to say. But
Yeah.
you've been publicly open about seeing a therapist. You're in talk therapy now. Is that
Oh, yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I've been in
it,
therapy since I was a kid.
yeah, I imagine so. And when do you know, like, when did your trauma start when you were a child? Is that really why you needed therapy from that point on? Or what would you say? will this go on forever? Are people in therapy forever from events like this? Or do you think you see a light at the end of the tunnel that, you
Um,
can step out of this?
I mean, I don't think therapy is, forever, but even if it were forever, I don't think that that's a bad thing necessarily. It's just whenever I'm in a more, as an adult, now that it's my choice to be in therapy, it's more like whenever I really need it, whenever my life is kind of, too much for me to handle on my own,
Hmm.
I'll go back to therapy. So it's
Sure.
never like completely over for me. I always want to keep it as an option.
Yeah. How did you've been on your own since you were 18? I think I remember you telling me that. It did when COVID hit us last year and kind of the world started to change. Did you have a down period in this? How did you weather through that? Because you're in LA.
Yeah.
I've been in New York for some time. Like we had it really bad with a lot. I mean, there were riots, there were marches, there were all these, insane things that were happening, as well as people dying from COVID. How did that affect you?
Yeah, it was pretty bad, honestly. I was actually going through a breakup at the time that COVID started, and I was
Oh no.
living with my boyfriend.
Oh no.
And so I had to move out during COVID, and so I moved twice, and then I was also working a job full time. I was teaching kids, which I love doing, but obviously that closed because of COVID. So, I had to lose my job because of it. I moved. It was, life was all over the place. I was so depressed and so upset for so long, but I feel like it's finally kind of turning around a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And you're probably not the only person that had all those exact same things happen
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
What a terrible,
definitely.
just the isolation alone is
Yeah.
bad enough. Not to mention, going through a breakup or moving or all those other things that could be happening is
Yeah.
crazy.
I
Um,
mean, it's sad, but it's kind of comforting in a way to know that like everyone's probably going through something difficult at that same time as you.
right. Yeah, there are clinical names for that. People experiencing the same type of thing in the world at the same time. This experience is definitely a shared human experience in a way.
Mhm. Yeah.
I want to ask you, and this may be a little bit of a difficult question, and you don't have to answer if you want to or don't want to, but I want to ask and see what you think about this. I'm curious. I said a little while ago that you've always said you know as much about this case as anyone else who searches the internet, and I remember when all this happened, and he was so your father was acquitted in the criminal trial of the murder. And then later there was a civil lawsuit that found him guilty. And then he had to,
Mhm.
pay a fine and things like that. I
Mhm.
can't help but wonder, I think if you ask 10 people on the street, did Robert Blake do it? It's probably going to be split down the middle. Some people
Yeah.
are going to say he was not guilty. His peers were there to judge it. They saw all the evidence. We have to trust the legal system. Then there are people
Right.
who are going to say he had a lot of high priced attorneys. It was like OJ, that's how he got off. That the people are going to say these things. You
Yeah.
must have something in you that feels the same way about this. Um, is this part of the trauma that you suffer from, that just your feelings on whether you could believe your father could really have killed your mother, or is it just the public speculations on this and then putting things in your head? Is it accurate for me to speculate that?
Yeah, I mean, saying that is difficult would be an understatement. I mean, I definitely struggle with, both options. And I don't know, I don't really, obviously I don't have an answer. I don't really
Yeah,
think anybody does.
yeah,
So that's hard not having answers for sure.
yeah.
Um, but
That's it's weird because there's a lot of these Hollywood types of things where there's been a murder or some form of tragedy or drinking and driving deaths, and there's
mm,
musicians that have been part of that. Like there's a million of these things,
yeah.
and O.J. Simpson's case is one of the most high profile ones there ever was.
Yes,
And
definitely.
people still to this day have just these crazy mixed feelings. Like the public is so divided on these things, and and no one stops to think about what the kids think. Like, what do OJ's kids think? They think that their dad could have done that. Like, there was some violence in that family for sure. There's a lot
Hmm.
of corroborating things, but at the end of the day, do you trust the legal system or not? That's really weird, and I don't know how I would feel in that situation. And I think it would definitely really mess with my psyche, knowing that there were just so many different types of divergent opinions. And that's really weird. I didn't mean to pry too much into that, but I wanted to
No, it's definitely interesting, and a lot of people like compare that case to OJ's. Like whenever anyone's like, "Oh, you're Robert Blake's kid," oh, what about the OJ case? A lot of
yeah.
comments on my videos and pictures and things like that are about that case. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely
And
crazy.
there's all of these, the Natalie Wood thing,
Yeah.
she drowned. There were other people on that boat, could it have been, was this another case of someone getting away with this? And, Vince Neil crashed his sports car on Hollywood Boulevard and, killed someone else, killed the person in the car with them. And people, celebrities seem to get away with things. It's like the weirdest thing.
Yeah,
Other
no,
parts of the
I
country.
agree. I mean, there are a lot of people who get away with things that they should never get away with.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you kind of asked a little bit, do I trust the justice system? No. Not completely, no. But I don't know, when I think about my own personal, relation to this case with Robert and all that, it's like I don't think about, did he do it? Didn't he do it? Like, let's look at the evidence, stuff like that. It's more just like, how do I feel?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, there's only one person that knows the truth, and that is whoever the real murderer is.
Right,
That is the
exactly.
person. And it could have been random. It could have been someone else in your mother's life. It could have been your father. It could have been any number of things. And we may never know the real
Yeah.
truth in this. If you could know the truth tomorrow, would you want to know it?
Ugh.
If someone had
um,
the answer and said, I will tell you tomorrow the truth, would you want to know, or would you want to keep going the way you are?
like a year ago, before I processed all this more and before I started talking about this, I would have 100% said no because I know I was like not ready to handle that.
Yeah.
But now I think if I had the option to know for sure, I would want to know.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting. You're pursuing a career as an actress now, which I think is
Yeah.
great. I think you're gonna do great.
Thank you.
Do you fear that if you start to become successful, that this is going to dredge up all of the stuff from the past? Does that bother you? Do you feel you're ready for that? The paparazzi will obviously going to start dogging you if you start to become famous. Does this worry you at all?
It doesn't really worry me that much because people have already been talking about this for years. And if I start doing something that I love doing, I think the pros will outweigh the cons.
Yeah. I'm curious. You're adopted, so you have
Yeah.
your parents' last name. Was there
Yeah.
ever any thought to taking the Blake last name?
Yeah, people have asked me that before. And you know what? Like, I love Rose Lenore. Lenore's my middle name, and it was supposed to be after The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so pretty together, Rose Lenore. And I wouldn't want to take the last name Blake, to like be an actress just so that people, know who I am or whatever. Like that feels weird. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I'd rather just kind of make it more my own and just use my own name.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious why. I mean, there's obviously obvious reasons why you probably
Yeah.
maybe shouldn't, but also it's Hollywood and people
Right.
keep the last name. That's why there's, these legacies in the business. There's, the Barrymores, and there's all kinds of people that are third and fourth and fifth generations and continue with those names. So I was curious about that. When you were a child, you mentioned earlier that the last time you saw your biological father was at 5 or 6 years old, but you recently visited him again. Why did you
Hmm.
decide to do that?
I've always wanted to. I think having one biological parent that's, not here anymore, is hard because I'll never get to meet her. I'll
Yeah.
never get that feeling of like, oh, I want to go find out who she is and see where I came from. So I always knew that when I turned 18, I wanted to meet him because, obviously he's older now and I didn't want to risk not being able to ever meet him.
Yeah. Do you think this is something that was one time you needed to meet him, or are you going to continue a relationship with him?
No, I met him, I think it's probably 2 years ago now. And we've been in touch since then. So it's, I've seen him more than once.
Yeah. Is that bittersweet
Yes.
to do that? It must be.
Yeah, it's hard.
You mentioned in other interviews that you purposely made sure that he would not say anything about the trial or any of that stuff from then, but you did share, time with him talking about you as a child and photos and things like that. Is that what your relationship's been like?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd rather get to know him for who he is now and have him get to know me for, who I am right now and what I'm going through right now than what we did, 20 years ago.
Right, for sure. You also recently mentioned that you visited your mother's grave for the first time. What was that like?
Yeah, that was really, really special. I didn't really comprehend when I was younger how close her grave was to where I grew up.
Wow.
I don't know why I always pictured it was, in Arkansas or something because I was born in Arkansas. So I think I knew that it was in LA, but I just didn't really like process that. And then when I turned 18 and was like, oh, I want to meet Robert, I was like, I also want to go see her. And I did. And I left flowers and I've been back a few times. And it's nice having that space, it's special.
Yeah, I bet. Does it give you closure in a certain sense?
Yeah, it does. It feels, it's sad, but it's, it's also nice. I don't know how to explain it.
It's incredible how much you look like your mother. You really you really do. Like
Thank you.
You are your mother. Like exactly. When you look at her, if anyone Googles what your mother looks like in you, it's you.
Yeah, I've never seen anyone and been like, oh, I look like that person. I never had that feeling. And then when I started, when I got older, I think is when I started to look more like her. And I looked at the photos on Google and I was like, wow, I look just like that. And I think it's cool. I think she's really pretty. So I love when people say that.
Did your mother have sisters or brothers? Is there that part of the family that you still are in contact with?
Not really. I don't know because, she had a lot of people in her family and I'm still working on getting to know everyone in my family who's in LA, I'm trying to figure it out here. So, someday I hope to get in contact with them, but one step at a time.
You have a really extended family. Like your mother was married a lot of times. Your dad was married a few times. So there's a lot of, half brothers and sisters and other things that are out there, a lot of relatives. I was just curious how connected you were with any of them. How can for people that want to find you out there on social media, where are you at?
Everything is just my name, Rose Lenore. My Instagram is rose.lenore. My TikTok is rose.lenore. It's all the same.
And you're actually becoming quite popular on TikTok.
Recently, yeah, within the past 2 weeks, it's been crazy. It's been nice.
Why'd you decide to get on TikTok? You've probably did that, toward the tail end of COVID here, maybe to give yourself something to do. What was the purpose of getting on that?
Honestly, at first, it was just to get through COVID because I was I was struggling so much in the beginning to find something to do every day. And I just felt like I wasn't achieving anything. And I was like, if I make, one dance video every day, that'd be really fun. And then it just started I don't know, I started doing it more and more. And recently it's been, people have been noticing it, which has been cool.
For sure. I think if COVID hadn't hit us, TikTok wouldn't have been near as popular. I think it was
I definitely would not be making videos.
It was definitely it's definitely a time waster. At the end of the night, I usually work really late into the night until 4:00 in the morning.
Mhm.
And I make the biggest mistake of opening up TikTok. And before I know it, 45 minutes has gone by. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how did I watch 45 minutes worth of like 1 minute videos?
It's so bad. It's so addicting, but it's fun. I love it.
Sometimes people will use music that's like an earworm. And I'm trying to fall asleep and I keep hearing this stupid little clip over and over
Oh
again
my
in my
god.
mind. And it's like so
Yeah.
dangerous. It's like
That's that's how they
it's,
do it.
I know, I know. But you have great stories on there. It's really interesting. You're really ballsy with some of the stuff you post. And
Yes.
when you get on in your live, you're addressing people's comments right there. And
Yeah.
it's really always fun to see you on there.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to be very straightforward, but also not offend people, you know?
What's coming up for you? Do you have projects in the works?
Um, yeah, I have some projects and I'm also just working on like learning and expanding what I already know, you know?
Yeah. Are you in college?
I'm not currently in college, no.
Okay.
But I
Yeah.
do plan on going back at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what about a book? Had anyone approached you about a book about your life? Is that in the equation down the line, maybe?
A lot of people who know me personally, who know me more than like the rest of the world does, have been like, Rose, you need to write a book about your life because it is so crazy. And I've considered it, but I don't know. It sounds like a little overwhelming, but maybe someday.
It's the first third, if anything, of your life. So you have a
Yeah.
long way to go for the life story for sure, which I'm sure will
Yeah.
be exciting. Rose, you were, I want to, as I wrap up here, I just want to say to you, you were part of a Hollywood story, a tragedy that was heard about all over the world. And in a way, that makes the type of situation that you had to endure unique.
Mhm.
And you're a great example of perseverance over a tragedy. Because, and I was telling you this before we even started recording, that there are a lot of people who would have never been able to make it 20 years after an event like that. They would have just checked out,
Yeah.
and here you are still, with a great attitude and direction, and you have persevered over this terrible tragedy. And also, I think there are other people that have had similar circumstances around the world and in the country, being a
Mhm.
survivor or associated with death in a manner like you have been.
Yeah.
And I feel that you're very inspirational in that way, that you're out and you're open about this, because you seldom see that with celebrities. So I want to ask you, what would you say to people out there that you could help, that have gone through a similar type of experience? What would your advice be to people?
Honestly, I mean, it's incredibly hard to go through something like this. Um, but it always gets better, and to not be afraid to ask people for help, whether that's your family or if you don't have family to go to, your friends, like somebody at school, anything. Because I know if I did not get the kind of help and support from my friends growing up and even now, like I don't think I would have made it to being 20 years old. And so just don't be scared to reach out. And also, if you need someone to reach out to me. I've talked to so many people through the comments or through like DMs on Instagram who have been like, hey, I have a story that's similar to yours. This happened to me and it's been so hard. Thank you for talking about it. And then I'll respond and I'll have a conversation with them. So it's really helpful for me to get those kinds of messages because it makes me feel like sharing my story is the right thing to do.
It is. It is. And I admire you for that, Rose. And I appreciate you being a guest today. And
Thank you.
uh, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Yes, I'd love to.
Well, take care and have a good day, okay?
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye. There you have it. My interview with Rose Lenore. Wow, what a story that is. I didn't want this to be a true crime podcast, So I tried to stay away from focusing on our parents and their stories, but rather how Rose touched their stories. But I'll tell you, there is so much surrounding all of this and the mystery and uncertainty of so much of it and the people involved. It's definitely a tragic Hollywood tale. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'll see you next week on Quest. Thank you for listening to Quest. Please be sure to rate and review this podcast. This podcast is produced by Todd Fischer and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Be sure to visit the official website for the International Association of Metacomics at metacomics.org or find us on social media for other unique content. And make sure to pick up a copy of the book that started a spiritual revolution, Metacomics: The Grand Design, available for sale online and at most major bookstores.